Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 8 running back rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season, going over my top 36 running backs. So if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, be sure to travel down to the description of the video. We have timestamps available there. While you're down in the description, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because not only will you gain an edge upon your league mates in order to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship with the daily content and live streams that I produce here on the channel, but of course, you'll help us get one step closer to achieving my goal this season of 100,000 subscribers. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, let's begin the running back conversation with Week 8 matchups based on rushing statistics allowed from weeks 1 through 7. We find that the Titans, Bills, Ravens, Bengals, Miami Dolphins, Chargers are the most advantageous matchups based on rushing statistics allowed, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns. Therefore, Jonathan Taylor has an incredibly advantageous matchup. Besides the fact that he's the number one running back, now has an opportunity of taking on the number one matchup of the week. I will reference back to these statistics over the course of today's episode, but just wanted to go ahead and share some of the more advantageous and disadvantageous matchups going into this week. Now, before I get into talking about my top 36 running backs, for those of you guys who want my all-encompassing rankings, my top 60 running backs, top 80 wide receivers, top 32 quarterbacks, etc., my flex rankings for half and full PPR, be sure to travel down to the description to get those rankings sent from my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning by signing up via Betr. Again, I'll be partnering with them for the entirety of the season, not only to provide rankings every Sunday, but also provide plays. Tonight is the tip-off of the NBA season. I'll be putting together a couple plays at the tail end of today's episode, but for those of you who want those rankings, sign up using code Andrew today, make that first-time deposit minimum of $10, and make a first-time play picking more or less on two-player statistics within a real cash play, and you'll be eligible to get those rankings sent from my email directly to yours for the remainder of the season. So for those of you who are interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. And new users who sign up today using code Andrew get a free $10. And of course, you'll be able to take advantage of the free play of 0.5 total points from Stephen Curry tonight as they take on the Los Angeles Lakers. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get into talking about my top 36 with our number one, Jonathan Taylor. Like I mentioned moments ago, of course, he has the most advantageous matchup at the position. The Titans allowing 19.93 fantasy points per game just off of rushing statistics allowed. On top of the fact that Jonathan Taylor has been on fire as of late, in 3 of the last 5 games in which he has played, 3 touchdowns minimum in those 3 games. On top of the fact that amongst all players in the National Football League, yes, he has 3 games of 3 touchdowns. The entire NFL combined in regards to wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs, there's only 3 total performances this season with 3 touchdowns. Skattebo, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Quinshon Judkins. So Jonathan Taylor is at a completely different level than the rest of the National Football League and the running back conversation. Now, this upcoming week, again, like I mentioned, they're taking on the Titans. Earlier this season, the Indianapolis Colts had the privilege of taking on the Titans. In that game in week 3, 17 carries, 102 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 31 fantasy points. We're expecting very similar numbers within this upcoming contest. Now, speaking of incredible stud running backs with top-tier matchups, it truly isn't fair that Bijan Robinson gets to play against the Miami Dolphins this week. The Dolphins, who are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 17.11 on a per-game average thus far this season, allowing 5.19 yards per carry to opposing running backs. Just mentioning some of the more recent performances from running backs against this Miami Dolphins run-stop defense. Buffalo, 121 and a touchdown. The Jets, 116 yards on the ground. Carolina, 228 and a touchdown. The LA Chargers, 138 on the ground. Cleveland, 92 and 3 rushing touchdowns. The primary starting running backs from these teams scored the following fantasy points in a half PPR: 26.4, 21.3, 31.9, 19.3, and 13.6. Expect for Bijan Robinson and Tyler Allgeier to both be relevant over the course of this game within an advantageous matchup. Number 3, we have Christian McCaffrey, who's coming off of his best game as a runner thus far this season, 129 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And you may be wondering, Andrew, why was that the case? Was the matchup against the Atlanta Falcons an advantageous one? Yes, arguably it was. But at the same time, you have George Kittle returning to the lineup. And even though George Kittle had 0 fantasy points, his impact was beyond the overall stat sheet. I'm talking about 30 total plays in which George Kittle was run blocking, 26 total plays in which Kyle Juszczyk was run blocking. When you have 6 or 7 offensive linemen practically out there blocking ahead of you, it's going to lead to finding success. This season, from weeks 1 through 6, we saw Christian McCaffrey only had 6 rushing attempts of 10 or more yards. In just week 7 alone, he had 7 rushing attempts of 10 or more yards. The impact of Kittle and Juszczyk's blocking is going to continue to allow him to be an elite top-tier option. On top of the fact that this is 7 consecutive games of 6 or more receptions amongst all players in the National Football League, whether that be RB, wide receiver, or tight end. He is number 6 in terms of total receiving yards with 516. I mean, Christian McCaffrey's going for 1,000 rushing yards and 1,000 receiving yards this season. He's going to be able to accomplish that for a second time in his career, and now has an opportunity of taking on the Texans, the 7th best matchup at the position this week. To continue on with the A tier, we have Josh Jacobs, who on Sunday morning was a game-time decision. We weren't aware as to whether or not he was going to play, considering the illness he was dealing with, on top of the fact that he had a late injury addition to a calf on Friday. But throughout the entirety of the week, I was confident that he was going to play, and he in fact did, because he's a tough SOB. And going into the week, even though he didn't play his normal amount of overall snaps, didn't get his normal overall touches, he still scored 18 plus fantasy points, because that's how much of an impactful piece he is for that Green Bay Packers attack. I mean, this is 3 consecutive weeks in a row in which he has been able to accumulate 2 touchdowns minimum on the ground. Over the course of the last 14 games of his career, 1 rushing touchdown minimum in 13 of those 14 games. I'm expecting continued success, and hopefully he'll be healthy for the upcoming weekend's matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers Sunday Night Football. Cam Skattebo is our number 5. Just a couple weeks ago was able to impose his will on the Philadelphia Eagles with 19 carries, 98 and 3 touchdowns for 30 fantasy points. I'm sure many of us remember watching that Thursday night game. And now he has an opportunity to take them on once again. And I'm sure the Eagles defense want their revenge, but the fact of the matter is the Eagles are the 8th best matchup at the position, allowing over 15 fantasy points per game on the ground alone. Recently, Minnesota 61 and a touchdown on the ground, Denver 99 and a touchdown. We have seen many of running backs, including Cam Skattebo as of late, dominate against that run-stop defense. And even if, in fact, they are able to put together a performance in which they slow him down on the ground, remember that in the Kansas City, New Orleans, and Denver matchups for Cam Skattebo, he has scored 9.1, 7.5, and 10.9 fantasy points just off of receiving statistics isolated. I think regardless of which way this goes, the Giants continue to play well against good teams. If it wasn't for the complete meltdown in this most recent game, they would have continued their streak of finding success against top-tier opponents, and hopefully this week, that'll be the case once again. Moving on to our number 6, we have Derrick Henry coming off of the bye, and with him coming off of the bye, of course, they had their ability to reevaluate the season. Currently sitting at 1-5, backs against the wall, they have nothing to lose, and going forward with Lamar Jackson returning, Patrick Ricard returning, this is going to be a position in which Derrick Henry is going to continue to find success, because this season, Derrick Henry has looked elite. In the 4 games in which he has played with Lamar Jackson, averaging 5.8 yards per carry, 3.5 yards after contact per attempt. And the last time out in this most recent week prior to their bye week, even without Lamar Jackson out there, he had 24 carries for 122 rushing yards against the Rams run-stop defense, which is elite this season, and that's 5.08 yards per carry. This is a running back that still has himself a lot of talent left in the tank, and he's going to be able to impose his will, taking on the 12th best matchup at the position, the Chicago Bears, allowing 5.32 yards per carry to opposing running backs, over 14 points per game on the ground alone. I'm anticipating this Ravens team to be hungry for a victory and be able to take out their frustration on this Bears defense. Number 7, to begin the B tier, we have James Cook. Last time out, had himself an underwhelming performance, primarily because he wasn't able to find the end zone, and that's each of the last 2 games. But I'm expecting this week for a bounce-back performance from the entire offense as the whole, as the Buffalo Bills have an opportunity of taking on the Carolina Panthers with Andy Dalton at quarterback. If, in fact, they're not able to take advantage of the quarterback play there, force turnovers, and set themselves up for even more touchdown opportunity, I will be surprised. I'm anticipating James Cook to find himself in the end zone, and even though the Carolina Panthers' run-stop efforts as of late have been elite, only allowing 48 rushing yards to the Jets, 29 rushing yards to the Dallas Cowboys running backs, and 14 to Miami, only allowing 2.17 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. We have seen the Bills' offensive line and their running game be elite amongst all in the National Football League, so expect a bounce-back performance here from James Cook. Javonte Williams is our number 8. This is the 4th game of the season in which he is coming off of with 100 or more total yards. The Cowboys thus far this season have been one of the best teams in terms of first half scoring. In fact, thus far this season, in the first 7 weeks, they are number 1 amongst all teams, averaging 18.1 points per game in the first half. And when you're able to score that many points in the first half, it leads to running the ball late in the form of Javonte Williams, in which he's able to continue to find success with this great offensive line in the second half of games. Now, when you're taking on the Denver Broncos, who over the course of the last 3 games are averaging only 4.33 points per game in the first half, and the Dallas Cowboys over the course of the last 3 games averaging 22.3 points per game in the first half, if the Broncos don't shape up, expect for Javonte Williams to get a lot of opportunity, not only in the first half, but also in the second half of this game to be fantasy relevant. Number 9, we have Achane, who's been one of the more efficient runners in the entire National Football League thus far this season. But the unfortunate reality is that the Dolphins' defense leads to negative game script, and Tua turned the ball over, is going to continue to throw interceptions. And of course, That's going to be a negative game script implied on top of it. So going into this week, with the Dolphins not able to stop the run, taking on one of the best run attacks in the National Football League in the form of the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, there have been many of opportunities in which we have seen Achane be successful in fantasy, but it requires that this offense is able to keep up with their opposing teams. This week against the Atlanta Falcons, it is an advantageous matchup on the ground. The Falcons just allowed 165 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns to the 49ers, 92 on the ground to Buffalo, 109 on the ground against Washington, and 103 in a touchdown to Carolina. So if given the opportunity, Achane should be able to surpass 100 total plus yards as a performer, and hopefully find himself with the receptions and touchdowns he requires to be a top 10 option. Number 10, we have Rachaad White. Bucky Irving is assumed to probably miss another consecutive game, as we have not been trending towards him practicing at all as of late. So even if he does practice this week, there's even a possibility in which, once again, he is going to be inactive. So as we approach the New Orleans Saints matchup, expect for Baker Mayfield and Rachaad White to get a little bit of a bounce back performance, as this most recent game last night was one of the worst games that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have played not only this season, but even last season. I'm expecting them to get a bounce back as they take on the New Orleans Saints, a division rival that they are very much so familiar with. The 10th best matchup at the running back position, nearly allowing 15 points per game on the ground alone. The Saints have allowed 216 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns to just the Chicago Bears running a game last week, 120 in a touchdown to Buffalo, 85 and 2 touchdowns to Seattle. Expect for Rachaad White, Sean Tucker to find a lot of success this week on the ground. Number 11, we have Jordan Mason. This is going to be a short week Thursday night football game. Yes, Aaron Jones has been designated to return from the injured reserve, but on a short week, I would not anticipate Aaron Jones to be playing. And even if he does, I wouldn't expect him to play at that great of a capacity. Earlier this season in week 1, when both Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason were both active, Jordan Mason played 54% of the snaps. Aaron Jones played 50% of the snaps. The overall rushing attempt split was 15-8. So Jordan Mason is the preferred runner, and as we proceed, he's going to continue to be that even if Aaron Jones returns against the Los Angeles Chargers on Thursday night. We know that Carson Wentz is starting, which is very positive. We'll continue to run the ball. We'll find an efficient offense. And the Chargers, who are allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 16.0. 5.16 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. Just the last 3 weeks alone, the Los Angeles Chargers have allowed 113 and 3 touchdowns to Indianapolis, 129 and 2 touchdowns to Miami, and 124 and 2 touchdowns to Washington. Expect for Jordan Mason to have himself an incredible performance this week. Saquon Barkley is our number 12. He's coming off of the least amount of total yards that he has had in a single game this season, 42 total. Again, the Eagles' run game has not found any success, and as they continue to struggle, it feels like in order to compensate for the lack of rushing ability, they're going to have to continue to lean towards the air raid. And if that's going to continue to be the case, when you have talent like Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, why not? Just continue to throw the ball. Even though Saquon Barkley has struggled, mightily as of late, and in his most recent matchup against the New York Giants, he didn't find much success on the ground either. Even though there were a couple, burst runs that he was able to find, a couple lanes here and there. The Giants are allowing 5.35 yards per carry on average. It's one of the more advantageous matchups you can possibly ask for. So if the running game is healthy and is efficient, I would expect Saquon Barkley to be relevant at a top 12 capacity, hopefully being able to find himself in the end zone to get to that 15, 16 point range this week. Number 13, we have the thumbnail of today's episode, Alvin Kamara. Kendre Miller unfortunately confirmed season-ending ACL injury. And if we return back to the early season antics of which Alvin Kamara was getting elite usage, we're talking about workhorse level of opportunity from weeks 1 through 4. Specifically was getting 13, 27, 19, and 19 touches. If we get back to that level of overall opportunity share, like I've mentioned in the past, opportunity leads to success in fantasy football because the singular way in which you're going to score more fantasy points is purely getting more touches. And if that's going to be the case this week, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, whether it is on the ground, through the air, I would assume that Alvin Kamara's overall production becomes a little bit more efficient, as over the course of the last 2 seasons here, he has been a running back that needs those 20 touches to be able to get into his groove and, of course, make defenders miss, find success. And against the matchup against Tampa Bay, I would assume, very familiar with that defense as a division rival, should be able to find himself a lot of success for fantasy points. DeAndre Swift is our number 14, who has been absolutely nuclear as of late. From weeks 1 through 4, averaged 3.3 yards per carry and 2.19 yards after contact per attempt, which is almost identical to his weeks 1 through 4 of last season, where he was an absolute mess and this offense couldn't run the ball. But since then, since they hit the bye week, coming back, reevaluating, he's been averaging 7.03 yards per carry in the last 2 games, over 3.1 yards after contact per attempt on average. The last 2 weeks, when he has been running outside of the C gap, whether it's left or right, he's averaging 8.47 yards per carry. Now he has an opportunity of taking on the Ravens, who are the third best matchup at the position, allowing nearly 18 fantasy points per game on the ground alone based on all the injuries that they have accumulated. Yes, the Ravens will come in with an incredible game plan in order to try to stop DeAndre Swift, but the rushing attack in terms of the outside zone that they have been, putting forth with DeAndre Swift, with Kyle Monangai, has been the entire highlight of this offense since returning from the bye, and they'll continue to utilize it until an opposing team can finally find a way to stop it. Moving on to our number 15, we have Breece Hall. So all the rumors as of earlier this morning is that Justin Fields is most likely going to continue to stay benched, as he was benched this most recent game against Carolina to try to give the team a spark. And if Tyrod Taylor is going to take over for the sake of Breece Hall, for the sake of Garrett Wilson, Mason Taylor, and their values for the remainder of the year, I'm hoping that Tyrod Taylor is able to make this offense efficient as they're taking on the Cincinnati Bengals this week, one of the worst defenses in the National Football League. And there's a lot of potential, especially for the running game, to find success, as the Bengals have allowed the fourth most fantasy points per game on the ground thus far this season, 17.36 fantasy points per game. Just to go over some of the more recent productive weeks for running backs against the Cincinnati Bengals, I'm talking about 5 consecutive games of allowing over 100 rushing yards to opposing running backs. Pittsburgh 141, Green Bay 105, Detroit 119, Denver 159, Minnesota 165. So why not the New York Jets, who have a talented running back in the form of Breece Hall, have a solid offensive line, and if they can move the chains on third down with Tyrod Taylor's efforts, it'll continue to allow Breece Hall to be fantasy relevant for another consecutive week here. Fingers crossed. Number 16, we have J.K. Dobbins. He only had 1 rushing attempt in this most recent week inside the 10-yard line. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because he had himself a solid week. 14 carries for 81 yards, 8.5 fantasy points. But, Bo Nix had himself 5 plays inside the 2-yard line, in which all of those overall attempts were passing attempts that led to a passing touchdown and completions, etc. It's incredibly unfortunate to see that once they're getting down, I understand that, of course, it's late in the game. They want to make sure that the clock doesn't run if they get stuffed, but there were so many opportunities for J.K. Dobbins to be handed off a ball, to find himself in the end zone. I very easily could have been able to accomplish that. Obviously, the negative game script led to that unfortunate reality, but going into this week, taking on the Cowboys, the 11th best matchup at the position. The Cowboys recently have allowed 130 and 2 touchdowns to the Green Bay running backs, 118 on the ground to the New York Jets, 200 rushing yards to Carolina, 67 and a touchdown last week to Washington. So if, in fact, the Broncos can start hot early, or at least just be solid and keep this a competitive game, I'm sure later in the game, of course, J.K. Dobbins will fall into the end zone because the script will not allow for him not to get those touches. Number 17, we have Kimani Vidal playing on a short week, Thursday Night Football, taking on the Minnesota Vikings. This most recent game, a negative game script against Indianapolis. They were down incredibly early because of the turnovers of Justin Herbert. Of course, Justin Herbert had to throw the ball 55 times, 4 receptions in his direction. Again, those are promising numbers, but in terms of the overall opportunity share on the ground, only 9 rushing attempts. I'm sure that number is going to increase this upcoming Thursday night, as the Minnesota Vikings have been one of the best matchups you can possibly ask for, allowing 124 on the ground to Cleveland, 121 and 2 touchdowns to Pittsburgh, 219 to the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, Philadelphia wasn't able to take advantage of the matchup, but I would anticipate if Joe Alt can potentially be available, Trey Pipkins, their starting tackles, if they're back, it will continue to help Vidal be fantasy relevant. But in the event in which those tackles are not going to be able to be available for this short week competition, which I wouldn't surprise me, and additionally, if the defense isn't able to hold up the Minnesota Vikings offense, I mean, there's a reason why Justin Herbert has had 38 plus passing attempts in 4 of the last 5 games. It's because they're having to throw the ball and ditch the running game. Number 18, we have Jaylen Warren. Look, he set a career high of total yards accumulated in this most recent game against Cincinnati, 158 total. The Packers this week, though, they're not the Cincinnati Bengals. They're an incredibly tough matchup, the 4th toughest at the position, only allowing 3.57 yards per carry on average. Luckily for Jaylen Warren, regardless of which way this script goes, positive or negative, Jaylen Warren has had 4 plus receptions in 3 of the last 4 games in which he has participated in. And since the Steelers have gone to week 5 and beyond, they've really reevaluated the way that they wanted to approach the game of football with this Arthur Smith-led offense, and they're running the football as much as anybody in the league because they're running out 6 or 7 offensive linemen. We're talking about Darnell Washington, a 300-pound tight end, on top of Spencer Anderson, which is a swing tackle / swing guard. Fullback doesn't really matter. When they have 6-7 offensive linemen out there, they're finding success, and that is why Jaylen Warren has continued to be relevant. So regardless of which way this goes in regards to this matchup, I anticipate him to find fantasy success. Number 19, Quinshon Judkins. who's coming off an incredible week. We were anticipating him to find success against Miami. He did exactly that. We're talking about 3 of the last 4 games in which he has found success because he has been given ample opportunity. 24 plus touches in 3 of those last 4 games. As long as the elite workhorse level of opportunity is designated in his direction, and as long as the Cleveland Browns defense can hold up the New England Patriots this week, which is going to be tough because the Patriots are the second toughest matchup at the running back position, only allowing 3.18 yards per carry on average, have only allowed 40 yards to Tennessee on the ground, 52 to New Orleans running backs, 60 to Buffalo running backs. They have been incredibly tough on the ground, but hopefully the rushing attack of Quinshon Judkins can be put in a position to find success and hopefully find the end zone to still be fantasy relevant despite the difficult matchup. Speaking of a difficult matchup, in this same game, we have Rhamondre Stevenson, who is taking on the Browns, only allowing 3.45 yards per carry, the 6th toughest matchup at the position. But the fact of the matter is, we have seen the Cleveland Browns, they've given up their fair share of rushing yardage to opposing running backs. Miami 93 on the ground, Pittsburgh 89, Minnesota with 70. So it's not impossible. And considering over the course of the last 2 weeks since Antonio Gibson went down with his season-ending injury, we've only seen Rhamondre Stevenson get more rushing attempts in both those games and get more overall snaps. Because it seems like TreVeyon Henderson must owe Mike Vrabel or Josh McDaniels some sort of money. I mean, Terrell Jennings is getting himself just as many rushing attempts and identical amount of snaps as, TreVeyon Henderson. Therefore, this is a lead back. This is his role. It's not going away. And as long as that's going to be the case, there'll be opportunities for him near the goal line to find the end zone, hopefully this week. Number 21, we have Chase Brown, who's coming off of the best game of his season with a 9.8 yard per carry average, 8.9 yards after contact per attempt. As long as he continues to ball out at such an efficient rate, obviously we're not anticipating him to average 9 yards per carry. But as we approach this upcoming week against the New York Jets, I mean, it's one of the more advantageous matchups, 13 points per game on the ground, allowed 110 on the ground to Carolina, 142 to Dallas, 109 against Miami. I would anticipate that if the Cincinnati Bengals are able to take an early lead, if the efforts of Tyrod Taylor did not keep this game close, it may lead to even more rushing attempts in the direction of Chase Brown, which could keep him fantasy relevant because of the extra opportunities he has not been exposed to earlier on in the year. Number 22, we have Isiah Pacheco, who since week 3 has been averaging 4.4 yards per carry on average, and in this most recent game, week 7, had his highest rushing attempt total of the season. I mean, he has gotten himself 10 plus touches in 4 of the last 5 games, which is incredibly promising. And in the last 4 games in specific, the Chiefs have put up 37, 28, 30, and 31 points as a team, scoring 4 touchdowns per game offensively minimum in each of those 4 games. But the unfortunate reality is that only 2 of those touchdowns have been accompanied by Isiah Pacheco. So he's only been able to handle 12.5% of the total touchdowns of this offense in the last 4 games. But luckily this week they take on the Commanders. Dallas just ran for 145 and a touchdown. Chicago 133. Atlanta 126 and 2 touchdowns. There's an opportunity here for Isiah Pacheco to follow in those footsteps if in fact given the ample set of opportunity. Number 23, we have Rico Dowdle. They're alternating series, which honestly should not be the case, but it is what it is. And if that's going to continue to be, Hubbard's overall series this most recent week, sure, were longer drives, which led to Hubbard getting far more touches than he should have. But either way, I mean, when we're talking about the efficiency of these 2 running backs, it's not even close. Chuba Hubbard only had 2 rushes of over 5 yards. Rico Dowdle had 6. I truly do believe the patience that Rico Dowdle displays as a runner continues to keep him relevant. And this week, taking on Buffalo, the second best matchup at the position, the only way to beat the Buffalo Bills is to run the ball against them, kill the clock, brutalize that defense that is allowing 5.44 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. And of course, keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands. That's the way to do it, and that's how I'm anticipating the Carolina Panthers to be able to find success this week, as the Buffalo Bills have given up their fair share of points to opposing running backs as of late. I mean, whether it is New Orleans, New England, Atlanta, it doesn't matter. Everyone finding success, and hopefully Carolina's next on that list. 24, we have Tony Pollard, who in week 3 against the Indianapolis Colts earlier this season, in which he had a privilege of taking them on without Tyjae Spears, had 16 rushing attempts for 45 yards and a rushing touchdown. 12.9 fantasy points and a half PPR. But now that you have Tyjae Spears getting about 8 or 9 touches per game over the course of the last 2 weeks, and this is expected to be a negative game script once again against Indianapolis, luckily for Tony Pollard, he is coming off of a week in which he had 6 targets, 6 receptions. We're hoping for that kind of workload of opportunity to persist. And yes, even though they are taking on the Indianapolis Colts, typically interdivisional matchups because they're so familiar with one another, this should be a game that should be a lot tighter than expected, primarily because the Titans, they scored 20 points last time out against Indianapolis in week 3. That's the second most points that they have scored as a team this season outside of their victory in the miraculous comeback against the Arizona Cardinals. So I'm anticipating Tony Pollard to still be relevant at a top 24 capacity. Woody Marks is our number 25. Very similar to Rico Dowdle and of course Chuba Hubbard. Woody Marks and Nick Chubb splitting series, but because of the elite nature of the Seattle Seahawks run-stop defense, it led to Woody Marks getting himself a lot of utilization, primarily because they were throwing the ball for majority of the second half. This upcoming week, they take on San Francisco. I don't expect that balance to be as one-sided in the form of Woody Marks getting all the touches in comparison. I mean, he doubled up Nick Chubb's overall rushing attempts. I expect Nick Chubb to still be relevant this week, but of course, I'm anticipating a negative game script. And if that's going to be the case, of course, Woody Marks should see himself a lot of exposure to opportunity within the receiving category. Number 26, we have Jacory Croskey-Merritt. We have Bill. For another consecutive week, he's struggling. And as long as this offense is going to continue to struggle to run the ball, Jayden Daniels is in question for the Monday night matchup against Kansas City. Yes, the Chiefs are allowing the 8th highest yard per carry average to opposing running backs this season, 4.63, but the Chiefs offense is scoring 4 touchdowns per game minimum. And if that's going to be the case, a negative game script will lead to Jeremy McNichols getting a lot more touches. If Christian Rodriguez is going to come in and steal touchdowns, it's not a good sign for Jacory Croskey-Merritt's overall potential this week. Chuba Hubbard begins the G tier, coming off of a week in which he had 16 total touches in the game against the New York Jets. Again, they're alternating series, so for those of you who have Chuba Hubbard on roster, again, he is going to be fantasy relevant in due time. Sure, as of late, he is coming off of a calf injury, and I think his overall efficiency is going to grow. And considering their number one way to beat the Buffalo Bills this week is going to be to run the ball and keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands, this is the second best matchup at the position. 19.6 fantasy points per game on the ground, 5.44 yards per carry on average allowed to opposing running backs. Atlanta ran for 202 touchdowns. New England 59 and 2 touchdowns. New Orleans 135 and a touchdown. Why not Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle imposing their will this week? Nick Chubb's our number 28. Like I mentioned earlier with Woody Marks, both these running backs are splitting series. And in a negative game script, it obviously led to less touches for Nick Chubb. But that was against an elite run-stop defense like the Seattle Seahawks. And this week, it should be a little bit more of an advantageous matchup taking on San Francisco. I would anticipate for Nick Chubb to get back to his normal state of getting 10 touches, because this is the first game this season in which he did not have 10 or more touches within the overall game. So if he gets back to his 10 touches, his 50 total yards, maybe he falls into the end zone, can very easily be anywhere between 5 to 11 points within the upcoming matchup based on his overall efficiency as a runner and how the game script kind of provides itself this week. Number 29, we have Tyler Allgeier. Once Bijan Robinson scores his 2 touchdowns and gets his 150 yards against Miami, it'll probably be Allgeier's turn to come in that game and take advantage of the 5th best matchup at the position. A defense allowing over 17 fantasy points per game on the ground, 5.2 yards per carry on average. Every single running back finding success against this defense over the course of the last 5 weeks. I mean, we're talking about Cleveland 92 and 3 touchdowns. Los Angeles Chargers 138. Of course, Vidal had a receiving touchdown on the goal line. Carolina 228 and a touchdown. The New York Jets find success, 116 against them. Buffalo 121 and a touchdown. Everyone has found success. So once Bijan finds his success, maybe Allgeier is able to find himself an early touchdown. Early, late, doesn't matter. Going to find a lot of overall opportunity. Expect for a game in which Allgeier probably gets himself upwards of 10 to maybe 15 touches this week. 30, we have Kyle Monangai, one of our waiver wire pickups of the week, coming off of a career high 31 total snaps played, career highs in total targets, attempts, touchdowns, yards, etc., and now has an opportunity of joining this backfield as the potential two-headed monster as we proceed, taking on a defense like the Baltimore Ravens, who have given up a lot of points to opposing running backs, top 5 matchup going into the given week. I would anticipate Kyle Monangai to continue to get touches. I mean, in the first half, had a total of 6 rushing attempts. So if he's able to get himself upwards of 10 touches overall within the given week, he has been an efficient enough runner, regardless of matchup, to be fantasy relevant once again. Another one of these waiver wire pickups is Brashard Smith on number 31. The Chiefs offense has scored 4 touchdowns minimum in each of the last 4 weeks. So as long as that's going to continue to be the case and they are blowing out their opponents, if Jayden Daniels does not play for the Washington Commanders, I would anticipate a lot of usage late in that game for Brashard Smith, who is getting himself 3 receptions minimum in each of the last 5 consecutive games. But if he's able to accumulate 10 rushing attempts in just the 4th quarter alone, just like this most recent week, expect for a lot of fantasy success at a top 36 capacity. Tyjae Spears is at number 32, coming off of touches of 9 and 8 in each of the last 2 games, has been an efficient runner in terms of the opportunities that he has been given. And considering the Tennessee Titans have played the Indianapolis Colts a little bit closer than the other matchups they have played this season, having scored 20 points as an offense earlier this year, when you add Tyjae Spears, when you add the new play calling, there is an opportunity in which Tyjae Spears could end up being at a higher potential clip of fantasy points within the upcoming matchup. Otherwise, again, very much so a desperate play for those of you who are in a bipocalypse situation. RJ Harvey is a number 33, negative game script bound. If in fact that takes place, considering the Dallas Cowboys are the highest scoring offense in the first half, and of course, as of late, the Denver Broncos have been one of the lowest scoring teams in the first half, we would anticipate RJ Harvey to get himself a little bit more receiving workload of utilization. And if that does take place, of course, it will lead to more fantasy point opportunity. Then we move on to the final tier of player. We have Kenneth Gainwell. Again, the elite run-stop nature of that Packers defense will lead to more receiving workload. Just like a couple weeks ago when the Pittsburgh Steelers took on the Cleveland Browns, Kenneth Gainwell, 6 receptions in that game because of the difficult running matchup within the given week. Then we have Tyron Tracy Jr. In a positive game script can be relevant. But again, we know that he is an efficient runner when given an opportunity, but he is still the RB2. If this game is a negative game script, he could end up being relevant within the receiving workload, considering he's a former college wide receiver. But if in fact they take an early lead, he could very easily, just like he did against the Denver Broncos, rip off any big runs, just like he did all of last season as the primary RB1 of this offense. Our number 36 is TreVeyon Henderson. Unfortunately, he owes somebody money in that organization, whether it's Vrabel, whether it's McDaniels, I don't know. But in the last 2 weeks since Gibson has gone down with his injury, he's getting less rushing attempts. He's getting less snaps. I mean, Terrell Jennings had himself more rushing attempts and an identical volume of snaps in comparison to Henderson. So it's not looking good for him as we proceed. All right, this is going to cover it in regards to my top 36 running back rankings. Thank you, everybody, for watching. The final thing I wanted to go ahead and do is put together a couple plays in regards to tonight's NBA tip-off for the season. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So going into tonight, we have 2 basketball games with the defending champs, Oklahoma City Thunder, taking on the Houston Rockets. And of course, we have the Los Angeles Lakers taking on the Golden State Warriors. Like I mentioned before, you can take advantage of 0.5 total points for Steph Curry tonight. An incredible overall position. Now, speaking of this game taking on the Los Angeles Lakers, I mean, Luka Doncic, he's been incredible in his career. When we're talking about games in 2024, 2025 as a Laker, in which he played without LeBron James in the lineup, he was averaging 30.4 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, 8 assists per game. I like the idea of going more than 28.5 total points. Again, he's averaging 30 points per game without LeBron. LeBron's dealing with a sciatic injury. Expect for him to be out. Therefore, Luka Doncic, a fantastic play. And then if we talk about the potential of the Houston Rockets taking on the defending champions, Alperen Sengun is one of the better big men in the National Basketball Association. But what he does incredibly well is dish the rock. And when you have someone like Kevin Durant on the team now, you can continue to go ahead and rack up your assists. Again, this is an assist machine. He is pretty much mini Jokic. And when you have the opportunity of leaning in that direction, I like these 3 plays going into tonight, or at least those 2 plays, along with the free play of Stephen Curry. That's where I'm going to go tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back later tonight, live streaming, answering questions for waiver wire, potentially putting together some more plays. So until then, I'll see you guys later. Peace.